Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and I have Victor Olliver with me. Hello, Victor.
Hello, Anna. It's quite we've a bit of a double act these days.
Well, it's because it's a joyous thing.
Likewise, likewise. But lovely to be here.
So I saw that you were giving a talk about nomadic ascendants. And of course, the Gemini side of me was very curious. So I thought I would invite I was going to say fellow Gemini, except I'm partly a fellow Gemini to
Sun Gemini
discuss
in my case.
exactly to explain what is a nomadic ascendant.
Well, it's all about me, actually. I love that subject. I can't beat it, really. But I did give a talk. I actually wrote an essay about it, which has proven to be the most popular essay that I've ever done. And it's called Embracing My Inner Weirdo. I'm going to put it in my nose. Or there's an alternative title to the essay, How to Be a 12-Faced Astrologer. And really, this problem arises of the nomadic ascendant. It can only arise if you don't know your time of birth or you don't know it for sure. And unfortunately, my mother's mind was elsewhere when I was born. I was an 8-hour labor. And, and all she could ever say to me that I was born in the early hours of May the 23rd. A birthday I share with Joan Collins, and I've practiced this joke before, I'm going to say it again. I'm AD and she's BC. Anyway, so we come back to the problem of when was I born? And over the years, she varied it between 1 o'clock in the morning, almost to 6 o'clock in the morning. And as you know, that's a problem because all the signs that that particular window encompasses are short ascension, which for those who don't know, means that the eastern horizon moves quicker through those signs. I mean, the short ascension signs are Capricorn to Gemini. They move through them faster. So for me, there could be 4 or 5 signs to choose from. And I suppose the point I wanted to make in my talk was that I've gone through periods when I was convinced I was Pisces rising or Gemini rising, even Taurus rising. And presently I am Aquarius rising, hence embracing my inner weirdo, because we tend to associate Aquarius with, well, not weirdos, but certainly with people who are independent and do things their own way.
Eccentric.
Well, yes, I suppose some people might say that. And I have been accused of slight eccentricity on occasions. And even in the world of astrology, which some people in the outside muggles world would regard as eccentric, even within the astrology world, I'm regarded as slightly peculiar. And but I've worked that to my advantage over the years. I won't go on about myself, but I can't help it. But I have found that the Aquarius fit is better for me than, but I suppose what I did during the talk was I related why I identify with Gemini, why I related to Pisces, which I think brings up another theme in our interpretation of horoscopes, that we are multifaceted, the chart itself is multifaceted. But sometimes there are problems in making distinctions between one planet and another, and even between the angular points. And of course, you need to know time to construct the chart properly. Otherwise, you don't know where the planets are, where the house, which house, is it the 3rd house, the 9th house? And you can't work out the other angular or cardinal points, so, the midheaven, the IC, the descendant. So this is a big subject, and we tend to associate the ascendant with how we present ourselves to the world. In fact, some people relate it to the 1st house and say that it may even describe you physically. I found myself, just to answer that particular point, I know there are schools of thought about this and there are different views, but I do find that a lot of the old books tend to make presumptions on ethnicity when they talk about how an ascendant sign describes whether you've got red hair or whether you're this, that, and the other. It only works, if you're talking about one type of ethnicity. So that's the broad introduction to this, to the topic of the nomadic ascendant.
Yes, I mean, funnily enough, I have been spending a bit of time with William Lilly of late. I've been rereading some of his books, and I was just looking at what he was saying about ascendants, and the descriptions very much, of course, reflect his time because he only had experience of meeting people of one type. So it's so we don't have that. Um,
Yes, it's
in the
old
same way.
school. I mean, some people are going to shoot me, put a contract out on me for saying it, but I said it. I mean, some guy, he made a very odd point to me. He said, "Don't you notice that as people get older, they all start to look the same, so you can't tell what their ascendant sign is anymore?" And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. All babies look the same too, and I'm not likely to confuse Roy Gillett with, say, Nick Campion. I mean, I've not noticed that people kind of become homogenized astro sausages as they get older.
No, I think that I'm not one to use these types of terms, but I would suggest that that's a fairly ageist remark. Um,
Yes, I was, well, I constrained myself, Anna.
yeah,
There's a side to me that will sometimes lure people into a trap before I just go whoomp. And of course, he fell into my hole very quickly.
I'm glad to hear it. So let's track back a minute. So you're talking about signs of short ascension, and I guess the point I'd like to clarify is, are you basing your observations purely on your perception of yourself through the lens of the ascendant as you're working out what your ascendant is? Or are you also plotting transits to your ascendant as you're trying to work out which which is the best fit, if I can put it like
Well,
that?
that's a very good question, and actually both apply. To answer the second point, of course, rectification is one way of getting around this problem, although I'm not a great fan of rectification, to be honest, because I tell you why I'm a little bit dubious, is that there's a presumption that the event happens at the exact moment of the aspect. And that is a problem. And if you factor in orb, then it makes a nonsense of the rectification. On the other hand, you know from previous conversations that I had a long period of caring for my mum before she passed away. And it's very interesting that if you take 28 degrees Aquarius as my rising sign, rising point, I should say, Neptune was exactly on my ascendant when I took over control of her life, and was almost exactly on my moon, and draconically in another way, when she passed away. So Neptune, yes, spiritualization, care, but also loss. So, but another funny thing too, I must say this, and it answers the second point to your question. We're all living experiments, aren't we? We're all laboratory rats in our own cages. And many years ago, back in 2006, I set up a naughty website called Madame Arcati, which I know you know about. And it was it was truly scandalous. And I did it because I was so utterly bored with the job that I had. It was a very well paid job, but I spent all my days yawning like the clappers. And I was reminding myself of the chart recently. The moment that I set up that, I won't go into all the details, but I'll just read you a quick paragraph because I was reminding myself about it. If I use 2 a.m., which is now the presumed and likely birth time for other reasons I can go into, when the Arcati blog, for the Arcati launch day blog, transiting Uranus was closely conjunct my moon in Pisces, trine the transiting sun, exact on the natal Mars. It's a perfect description because it was an aggressive site, hence the Mars, but it was also extremely personally liberating for me because I found myself unleashing a side to myself I scarcely knew existed before. And that's very much the Uranian influence. Now, to do a proper rectification, you've really got to factor in 20 or 30 things. And so I can't honestly say to you that I have properly rectified the chart. But having spoken to many experienced astrologers, I've been assured that I cannot be Pisces rising. I don't know why, but and it's unlikely I'm Taurus rising because I've never been particularly driven by money, or although of course I was gorgeous when I was young. So you could say that Venus is my chart ruler, bestowed upon me such gorgeousness that, you know, I won't go there. And then I played with the idea possibly of Capricorn rising, but I don't think so. And Aries not too, because my approach to life is not that instant. But there again, this is where it becomes interesting, Anna. you can then have a conversation with yourself. Oh, hang on a minute, Mercury's in Taurus. So that's going to slow down the old Gemini bit. And then as for Pisces rising, which came during the period of care, and then I became very interested in spiritualism as well, and the whole question of afterlife and related philosophies. But then my moon is in Pisces.
Exactly. And this is the issue, isn't it? When we're trying to pinpoint any one thing. And that actually, funnily enough, is the reason why I can be a little bit skeptical when it comes to rectification. Because how many times do you just get one transit that's significant? And I've got at least three going on at the moment. And when I look back to different periods in my life that have been, let's call them challenging, it's never been one transit. It's always been more than one. And how do we tease it out? Okay, in my case, I would say probably the very, very, very worst one was one where my angular grand cross was activated. So I would hazard a bet that I'm pretty, I'm not far off in terms of my ascendant, because it was so absolutely the feeling of an earthquake when it was my grand cross being activated. And actually, funnily, this year, same things happened again. And yeah, it's not been fun. So so maybe I'm arguing against myself, but nevertheless, it is true that this year I've had more than one transit going on. So it's a bit, I guess what I'm saying is that you need to have a little bit of finesse when you're looking at these things. And yeah, if I look at you, I think, yeah, there is Pisces there, but is it the ascendant? And I think the clue that the big thing you said there was about the approach to life, the approach to the world. And to me, it doesn't feel like a Pisces approach to life with you. And it certainly doesn't feel like a Capricorn approach to life. And Taurus, no, it doesn't feel right to me. Aquarius does, though.
Yes,
Uh,
I mean, a traditional astrologer suggested to me that he says you're so obviously Aquarius rising. But the interesting thing, just to bring it back to, we always try to stick. The strange thing, misperception about astrology is that it's kind of all over the place. But actually, it doesn't work if you don't actually apply great rigor to it. And so I almost put my mother over the years on the rack. I was almost tempted to put some rohypnol in her, but it might have actually released her memory. I mean, only an Aquarius rising would say that about his beloved mother. But towards the end of her life, rather, I was told recently, as I'm getting older, my eyesight's improving. And these glasses are not as strong as the previous pair that I was wearing. And the strange thing about my mother, as she grew older and towards the end of her life, her memory improved. She could remember everything from the past. And it was really amazing. Obviously, something's going on in the mind as it is in the body, but unexpected things. We also associate age with negativity, but I'm afraid nature has got a few tricks up its sleeve. And so the guy that thinks that we all age and end up looking like a homogenized sausage, well, watch this space. But the point of the matter is that she remembered that it was an 8-hour labor, and that she probably was admitted around 6 o'clock in the evening. She remembers it being around supper time. So it is fair to estimate 2 o'clock approximately. I mean, to a purist, that's still not good enough. Certain people won't look at a chart unless they've got the clock time, or the clock time is given to them, because there's that Nick Campion theory, and others hold it. Even Geoffrey Cornelius has advanced this idea. It's what's going on in here as much as what's going on in the horoscope. So if you truly believe the birth data, I don't know what you think about this, Anna, if you truly believe that this is the right birth data, it still works. But I don't know. It's a
well,
dangerous argument, isn't it?
it's a dangerous argument, and yet I do find myself attracted to it. My Virgo ascendant doesn't like it because it likes everything to be neat and precise. But the strong Neptune in me is going, that feels right. And the reason it feels right is because of this idea that our observations, it's that quantum physics thing about, yes, the observer actually has an impact on the outcome. Just the very act of observing influences the outcome. So to me, that actually makes sense. And, when I first started as an astrologer, I was far more rigid than I am now. And I think it's because I've learned that astrology is more fluid than we would like to think.
Mm.
Perhaps for that very reason of the role of the observer, which is why I would accept that argument and think, yeah, okay, I think that's right. But it's also because I always say the chart has many safeguards within it. So, and you've called it, I think, the rule of three. Other people have called it the rule of three. There's always more than one thing.
Yes, yes.
That shows you that this particular theme is important.
Mm.
So we could, look at your chart closely and check to see whether, what part Uranus is playing, whether that would give you a Uranian flavor that would account for it to feel like an Aquarius ascendant. We could do that. But I have come to the conclusion that what we feel plays a large part in this. Now, if, for instance, I use Placidus because I like Placidus and it makes sense to me, and my planets are all in a particular place. Now, if somebody came to me and said, "Oh, here we go, equal house, and by the way, you've got Mars in a different house to the house
Yeah.
that it's supposed to be in Placidus. Let's put it in the 10th house." Now, there would be truth in that because my Mars is conjunct the MC. So
Right.
I won't be able to dismiss it completely because that Mars experience is true to me, but it would be missing something of the 9th house that goes beyond the fact that I've got Venus and the Sun in the 9th house. There's little details there that are very much Mars in the 9th house that would be missing for me. So unless you could take Mars out of the 9th and find those little details by another means in the chart, I wouldn't want to take it out of the 9th house because my experience is that Mars in the 9th house conjunct the ascendant makes sense. So I think we have to listen, and there are times when I get approximate birth times. And I always say to my clients, well, okay, so this is not going to be as precise. There's information that's missing. But you tell me, I'll give you the options, and you tell me what feels right to you. Because I tell you what, the one expert that exists is the client that's sitting in front of you. It's not you, it's them, their feeling of themselves and their lives. That's the testimony, that's the context. And so if I'm giving them different options and they say to me, that feels right, I'm going to go with that. And then I'll test it. And then I'll test it.
Yes. Yeah.
But we have to respect what we're being told as well. So, I look at you and you're saying Aquarius ascendant, and I'm going, yeah, of course it is. Now that makes sense. Capricorn, no. No. Taurus, you do post a lot about food, but then you've got Mercury and Taurus, don't you?
This is the problem, you see.
See,
And yeah, I mean, you do get into a debate, and as you say, I do think it comes with experience. When you, rather like playing music, you look at the horoscope and you become aware of all the nuances, and you're factoring so many things. There's another side to it too, and it depends how theatrical you are. But we talked about being multifaceted, but you can find yourself playing a part for, shall we say, a chapter of your life. I always remember, for example, when I went to my first Astrological Association conference back in late 2014, would you believe? And at that time, I was convinced I was a Gemini, which takes us more towards about 5 o'clock in the morning. And everyone was saying, oh, yeah. And then they'd get their Astro Gold out on the phone and everything. Oh, yeah, I can see that, you know. And then they'd looked at the Venus-Saturn opposition and then their faces drop. But the point of the matter is, I myself related to that thing that we call Gemini rising. In other words, I saw myself as more sociable, more chatty, more conversational. When I was a younger person, I actually was quite quiet, would you believe? And relating it back, I've gone through phases of thinking I was Pisces. And even when I was very young, I actually went through a very perverse, what they call willful muteness. I don't know if you've heard of this condition. I don't actually know its technical label, but I was willfully mute. And it was a form of rebellion. And so logically, I have backtracked it to Aquarius.
But yes, because Aquarius does have that, rebellious side to it. I have seen that selective mute.
That's
Mute.
it. Yes.
I have seen it. Funnily enough, in the charts of people who have Mercury retrograde, that's where I have spotted it a number of times. Where as children, they just didn't want to talk. It was no, just didn't want to talk at all. So I've seen that. Yes. Now coming back, I guess the questions I ask usually center around childhood when it comes to ascendants. And so, without wishing to probe into your private affairs, I would say that's where I would look. And if it was an Aquarius ascendant, I'd be looking for perhaps an unusual childhood, or a childhood where there was change that the child didn't really have a lot of input into. That's I would be looking at that. I've seen that ascendant so often in charts of, for example, children whose fathers were in the military and had to move a lot. So there was that feeling of not being able to root into anything, so constantly being the outsider. So that's a very literal sense in which those Aquarius ascendants experienced, because they were moving and not being able to make connections very easily. As soon as they made friends, they were off again. So there was that sense of not being rooted in anything. So those would be the questions I'd be asking you about this potential Aquarius ascendant, because if you answered yes to that, I'd be 100% it's an Aquarius ascendant.
There are it's interesting you say that. I can relate to it. But in another way, my father, I can speak about this quite openly now, and it doesn't upset me to talk about it. But I now understand that my father was psychologically ill, and it arose from trauma in his own childhood. I won't go into all the details, but he was definitely traumatized by it. And he had a series of nervous breakdowns throughout his life, but he was high functioning. So he was quite successful in the business terms. The outside world wouldn't have known that he was unwell. He had a good social personality. You would never imagine there was anything wrong with his mind, but it was the people at home that knew it. And I think if we accept that Saturn is the father, I know people say the sun, there are arguments forever about what characterizes what, but I find it very interesting that my Saturn, close to the MC, in the 10th, exactly opposite Venus, down in the 4th. There's an interplay of energies going on here. And you talked about rootlessness. Well, I never felt rooted to my father. I could never connect with him. So what you described, the moving around and never being able to, you never feel secure. And I never felt secure because I never felt him. He was I had a father. He was there, but not there.
And so when you were in school, did you feel like there was something different about you?
Oh, yes. I felt like a complete freak. And I was perceived as a freak. And I had this double-edged thing to me that I don't succumb to anything. Even as a child, I was a tough tough in the sense of my moral spirit. I wasn't tough in the sense of physically, but I wasn't stupid. and I wasn't meek. And I veered between a very strange articulacy and peculiar articulacy. People would say I'm on the spectrum. That's the standard thing to say now. I had this peculiar ability to find the words, and I had an odd sort of accent, but at the same time, I would go silent and shut up. But I didn't do it because I was afraid. I did it because I thought they weren't worth it, which in itself is a bad state of mind. But I can now examine myself with a clarity that I've never imagined, well, and also dispassionately.
Yeah. And see, that sounds to me like an Aquarius ascendant now,
Mm.
because what you're describing is that experience of feeling like the outsider. And it's that incongruity between the inner world and the outer world. And I mean, I know that Aquarius is not considered to be an inner world sign, but I don't mean it like that. I mean it inner world as in your private domain, your home,
Mm. Mm.
is not what everybody else would expect it to be, and you feel that contrast. Um, so yeah, that sounds to me like an Aquarius ascendant. And as regards the rest of the chart, with your father, am I remembering correctly? It's a Saturn on the MC opposite Venus on the IC.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. You see, again, there's that restriction around the relationship with father. So, you've described your father beautifully with that Venus in the fourth house,
Mm.
on the IC, where he's sociable, he's probably quite charming, he's very successful. But then there's that Saturn opposite, um, make, making this not a warm relationship as you would expect with that
No,
Venus.
exactly.
And of course, Saturn in the 10th would be a restriction around your mother as well.
Absolutely. That's
Because
exactly the case.
living with
Mm.
him,
Mm.
and his, let's call them issues, would have would have made her feel constricted. Um,
Absolutely. And she was full of life. She was vivacious. But, in the end, she found that, bearing in mind she came from a Roman Catholic background, so there was natural restrictions morally. She broke away from him through spiritualism, would you believe, interestingly. Moon in Pisces in my chart.
yeah,
On the day
yeah,
she died, I may have told you this before, aside from the tropical Neptune on my moon, um, the yes, this is right. The tropical North Node was exactly on my draconic moon, exactly by a minute.
yeah. I do remember that.
Mm.
So I guess what we're illustrating with you, generously sharing some of your private experience or your personal experience, is that when we're looking at understanding the ascendant, we have to take into context, um, the the person's, early life, and understand it within that context, and then that gives us more confidence perhaps in understanding, um, how well
Absolutely.
theory
Absolutely.
act.
It's an holistic. I mean, I don't like to use the word holistic because it's overused, like the word passion. Everyone's passionate about everything. But it is what you've just described, Anna, is the proper holistic approach. It just reminds me, too, that in the equal house, I can't remember Placidus now, but in equal, Uranus, my Uranus actually falls in the sixth house, which, of course, relates to matters of health. It brings a health theme to that Uranian energy. And if I think about it, my whole life has been dictated by other people's health. Yeah, I mean, that's not unique to me. I'm not complaining about it. But I've only recently, how sometimes something's staring you in the face and you don't see it. And I suddenly just looked in the mirror, the metaphorical mirror, and I thought, I've been surrounded by mental illness all my life.
So I'm going to just move slightly sideways here, because
Mm.
I'm wondering now about progressions.
Oh, yes.
And with the fact that you've been looking at, um, ascendants ascendants of short ascension.
Yeah.
um, I'm wondering whether you've played with progressions, and whether what you found.
Well, I've not played around them as much as I ought to. I was having a conversation. I won't go into what we were talking about, but funnily enough, she raised the issue of secondary progressions, Anne Whitaker, and she's a real expert on the subject. The only thing I've done is this realization about my life has happened while the progressed sun is sitting exactly on my Uranus. It actually started with the progressed new moon, which is exactly on my Uranus in Leo, in 3rd degree Leo. Isn't that strange, in the 6th house? And these realizations, I mean, the normal thing to say when progressed sun hits your Uranus is to say, well, there's a big change in your social life, or something happens that's unpredictable and unexpected. And all that, to some extent, is true. But the interior aspect to it has been that, of course, the sun is your, you know, in astrological terms, your heart. It is the inner life. And it hits Uranus, and what happens? There is a form of liberation. The cage door is flung open. And so, I'm addressing other issues in my life at the moment, which in the past I could not possibly have addressed dispassionately. And it's a funny age. I mean, 66, a strange time to do this, but it's never too late. There's no such time as we know as astrologers. Time is so relative to experience. You can meet the wisest person at 26 years old. You meet an 82-year-old, the biggest idiot you've ever met. So in experiential terms, time is rendered a nonsense. And I'm glad that I'm reaching areas of revelation, which I'm also happy to talk about. Although I realize I'm talking to somebody who's highly emotionally and intellectually intelligent. That helps.
Well, thank you for that. I just want to take you back though, because I think you said it, what was it, 27, 28 degrees Aquarius, your ascendant.
Yes.
So if I was to give you homework, I'd say go and find out what happened when that progressed ascendant went into Pisces, and when that ascendant progressed into Pisces, and subsequent changes. Go and track it and see how that feels.
Yes, you're sounding a bit like Anne, actually, and I'm because she's done a lot of stuff on the secondary progressed sun and all that stuff, and you know yourself. But I am going to do that homework, and I may even turn it into a talk.
I think that would be fascinating, because I have a quiet fascination with the changes that happen within us when our ascendants progress. I've found that to be absolutely fascinating, and I know that you're short of time, so I'm going to keep this very, very short. But there's a distinct difference between me pre-ascendant progressing into Libra and me post-ascendant progressing into Libra.
It's interesting. So do you think it adds another layer, or does it sort of?
I do. I mean, the only thing I can say is that I am as shy as I have ever been with a Virgo ascendant, believe it or not. But I have learned as it progressed into Libra, I learned how to, I developed skills to enable me to actually be much more sociable on the. So that's, a very succinct way of putting it. And I really enjoy the fact that my progressed ascendant is in Libra. It's a lot nicer than when it was just in Virgo, more pleasant, if I can put it like that.
Are you suggesting that it elevated the charm side of you, or it made you more socially empathetic? Because shyness can sometimes arise from a fear, can't it?
It is. I think actually so if I can put it very simply, I was bullied when I was in school, not an unusual experience. Lots of children are bullied. But what it did is it made me very hesitant to openly engage, if I can put it like that. And so it gave me the predisposition to assume that I was not going to be liked.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and so that's a de facto thing. So it then going through into adulthood, I think my Libra, my ascendant progressed into Libra after, I think it must have been in my late 20s, early 30s, after almost a decade of Pluto oppositions.
Oh, great.
So, which did nothing to enhance my
Oh
sense
dear.
of
Yeah.
likability. So I'd go out into the world with all of my all the enthusiasm that you see in me now was always there, and I always went out into the world with a degree of enthusiasm, if I can put it like that,
Right.
because it's pretty irrepressible, but with a caution that was there, and an assumption that at some point there was going to be rejection somewhere. So if I can put it like that, I think that'd be a fair way of saying it. Progressed ascendant goes into Libra. And funnily enough, it was being an astrologer that started to change that perception. And it had nothing to do with my chart or anything like that, or discovering my chart. It was quite simply, I was doing psychic fairs
Oh.
and having to give talks and so on. And then I thought, oh, maybe I might be wrong. Maybe I can do this people thing. I'd been doing it all along. I just didn't realize I'd been doing it all along. But because of the circumstances I was doing it in, suddenly I thought, oh, maybe I can engage with people. And that was around the time when the ascendant progressed into Libra.
Oh, that's
So it's
wonderful.
not like I acquired something. It's that I began to shake off that that view of myself, which had been given to me by some very negative experiences throughout my childhood. And I look back now and I think I can understand perhaps why I might not have been the most popular child in the world. Because, Virgo ascendants are very keen to be seen to be perfect and doing the right thing. And I can see that might have rubbed up other children in the wrong way.
Well, I mean, it's interesting about school, isn't it? And astrology gives us the ability to look at ourselves three-dimensionally. It's not just a psychological thing, which can be heartless, the way that people get categorized and this sequence. And it sounds sometimes like we're just like humanoid robots. But when you bring spiritual symbolism in, which is how I regard astrology, it opens up a multifaceted side of our natures so that we don't necessarily you've described the bullying at school. Yes, that was a horrible experience, obviously negative. But at the same time, it's made you, and you've formed yourself out of it. You've gone through some kind of metamorphosis. And it's fascinating to see that transition from Virgo to Libra. And you've still got the Virgo thing because you want everything secretly to be perfect, or as clear and clean as you can get it. But at the same time, you've now factored in the fact that other people are part of this, and that you're going to be you're the agency for it in helping others.
Absolutely. And the thing about that is that when you're a child and you have that Virgo energy in you and you're seeking perfection, you don't realize that you're accidentally being judgmental and critical.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's a very good point.
Keep in mind that I have Uranus and Pluto in the first house, and Pluto conjunct the ascendant. I was probably a very intense child. And I mean, I can look back and I can see, yeah, I was pretty intense. And I didn't like it when people, didn't do the right thing. It made me very uncomfortable because I was trying to follow the rules, because I was trying to understand how the world worked. So it was very confusing when other children didn't do that. And I think even though I wouldn't have been openly confrontational, I wasn't like that. I think they would have sensed my disapproval. After all, Pluto's conjunct Ascendant.
That's how sensitive
I
kids
didn't
can be.
play, didn't play. I didn't play in the same way that they did, and so consequently, I stood out. Quite aside from the fact that by the time I got to Canada, of course, I was an immigrant child, and my parents dressed me differently from the children. So that was, you know, everybody else is in jeans, and I'm formally dressed. So you know,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, just you're never
so
going to fit in too much.
it's never going to fit in so much. So there's all of that. So I look back and I can see, and I'm full of compassion for the little girl that I used to be, and I look at the other children and I think, yeah, I get it. Okay, you know, what you did was not good, but you
But
know,
it's I think it's psychologically healthy that you can twist and turn in the nicest possible way, and almost like looking at yourself in a diamond and seeing different images of yourself on different surfaces, and it's a bit like that.
yeah.
And I mean, and it's interesting about the bullying thing. In my case, there was a little bit of bullying, but I could look after myself. And I noticed as I grew older into my teens, people treated me with great caution. and so I think people try to ignore me to death.
Hmm. Oh, but that's the being cancelled is what we would call it.
Yeah, we started cancel culture back.
Oh, cancel culture is as old as the hills. It's just that
Mm.
of we've taken it to somewhat new heights of perfection, I think.
Oh
Um,
yes, yes, it's just marvelous.
yes. Anyway, looking at that's so Aquarian though. That ostracization from
Yes,
the and being it really is the outsider. I believe eccentric means outside the circle, and
yes,
why I do use that word with Aquarius, because it that is perfectly descriptive of the experience of Aquarius of being outside the circle until they can find the circle that fits,
mm,
and then
mm.
and then it's it's good because it's very much about being part of the group. But that's what's so painful. It's the story of Prometheus, isn't it?
It
Being
is. Yeah.
you know the outcasts. Oh,
Mm.
well, thank you so much for
Well, that was
another.
quite in depth, wasn't it?
I didn't expect that. I
No.
thought we were going to have a nice chat about nomadic ascendants. I don't like my. I'm going to find a way to change it.
No, I think it's interesting though that and it's part of you, Anna, that you've taken what was basically a comedy routine talk. I mean, I just sat there and didn't know. I just stood there for an hour talking. I did another talk actually with no notes whatsoever. But what you've done is to take it actually back into the heart of the horoscope, why it matters, and how it can reflect so many different facets of our life, going back to year dot. It's amazing. It's amazing. And thank you for sharing your stuff with us as well.
Well, you can't just have one person sharing. It's not fair.
No, no, it's naughty. But it's fascinating to hear other people's experience, especially the Virgo Libra progression thing. You've definitely encouraged me to take a closer look at my own.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
should, because I think you're going to find it fascinating because I've since it's I do pay very much attention to those points. If a client is coming to me and I spot that the ascendant has just progressed into a new sign,
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
that I find really interesting.
Yeah.
And we can often spend the entire session discussing that change because it's significant. And that's why I pointed you in that direction. And it's learning from my experience that's made me pay attention to this. So yeah, have a
It'll
look.
help with the rectification process
That
as well.
that's the other thing I have in mind.
And the sad thing is, without the time, people, you can't do it.
No. No, but
And so please, I mean, did I tell you something Chris Mitchell told me? I think it was Chris Mitchell. He'd probably sue me for libel if he didn't say this. But he told me that it's one thing, sometimes you're given a little card and it doesn't have the time that you were born. But if you go to the hospital registry, they may have the details because the nurses often record the time. Have you heard this one before?
do you know what? That is ringing a bell.
Mm,
I seem to remember years ago one of my students doing that,
mm.
and then another one trying it, but the hospital was no longer there.
Oh dear.
So
Well,
yeah,
I'm going to try Brighton Hospital because I was born at Brighton Hospital, and so I'm going to see if some canny nurse recorded the time of my birth. It'd be funny if I end up being Taurus rising, isn't it? But I don't think so.
born
Um,
at 11.
but anyway, we'll see. We'll see. But I just plant that thought in the minds of viewers that if you're intent on finding time and you're born, I mean, if you're born in America, more likely you'll know your time. Other countries are very assiduous about recording the clock time, but Britain, it's not so good.
Yeah, I think in America it depends on what state you were born in as well.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Canada seems to be very good. The Australians seem to be very sharp on time. I've noticed with my clients. Um, but there we are. That's another subject. The solar scope. What do you do when you don't have time? Another
Vic,
time, maybe.
thank you so much for another absolutely wonderful conversation.
A pleasure. Always a pleasure, Anna.
And if people want to find you and learn more about what you're working on, how do they
Yeah.
do that?
Well, I've got a website, victorolliver.co.uk. It's two L's in the Oliver, or the one L that was put on my birth certificate, but it's two L's. And just drop me a message if you like. And also, I edit the Astrological Journal, so you can find me there as well.
Perfect. It will all be in the description box. Victor,
Okay, lovely. Pleasure, Anna. A pleasure.
and thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.